Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Tax Compliance for Businesses That Charge Little to No Sales Tax, presented by Maria Tringali and Connor O'Donnell from Avalara. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have. If you'd like to submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar, and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees, as well as those who registered but were unable to attend. And finally, please take a moment at the end of the presentation to answer our survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business. For that reason, we've invited Avalara here today because they are industry leaders in automated sales tax solutions. So whether you're here researching a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions you have. And lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we post our recorded webinars. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Maria and Connor.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks to SWK for giving us this platform to talk about Avalara, talk about tax compliance, and how we can help out with some of these tasks that you might be manually doing by hand. And thanks to all the attendees for taking time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Avalara and how we can be a value-add partner to you. So my name is Connor O'Donnell. I am a sales executive here at Avalara. I'm a partner, and I've been partnered with SWK for about a year and a half now, so very familiar with the processes and the type of clients that SWK typically partners with. And also with me, I have Maria Tringali. She's our senior solutions consultant. And together we're going to talk to you not just about what we're seeing in the compliance world, but we're also going to talk about some of our products that Avalara really amplifies and can help automate some of the processes that you're currently doing by hand, or some efficiency in those processes. So agenda. So really what we're going to try and target is a couple different things, but how I see this more holistically, we're going to just talk about kind of what Avalara does, and then from there, we're going to go into some of the things and challenges that we see in the compliance space. You know, Nexus is going to be a big focus of our conversation. And then we're going to start talking about some of the products that Avalara has and how those products can help streamline your processes in regards to product taxability, use tax, dealing with your exempt customers, business licenses. And then we're going to end the conversation and the presentation today with some Q&A, because the thing that I've learned here at Avalara is that every situation is unique. So we want to be able to triage any of those questions that might have arisen during the conversation or that you're just experiencing in your day-to-day. So let's get rolling, y'all. So I'd imagine kind of if we played the word association game and I said Avalara, majority of you might think sales tax initially. And more specifically, sales tax calculation. And really where Avalara, that's how we got our start in 2004. It was solely based on sales tax calculation back then, but we've done a lot to increase our service offerings, and we've drastically expanded our service offerings in the past 2 decades. So as you can see from here, we've got a lot of different service offerings that you can experience for yourself and can be a value add to your business. So as you can see from this infographic, tax calculation is just the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended. And in today's conversation, Maria and I are going to bring to the surface a few of these submerged offerings. I'm going to stop my iceberg puns right there. So, but you know, really before we get into what Avalara can do, I want to address a pretty big, kind of danger or obstacle that a lot of customers are facing, and one of the real main drivers of why folks like yourself engage with Avalara, and that being audit risk. So some of you might have already experienced an audit already, and I'm preaching to the choir that they're not incredibly pleasant. And with 60%, as you can see here, 60% of audits being focused in these 4 industries: manufacturing, construction, wholesale, distributors, retail. most of y'all are in this. And because of that, mitigating your audit risk is vital, especially when we see down here that the average cost of an audit is about 114K all in. So a lot of times when I'm talking with folks like yourself, some of you might be thinking you're a highly exempt organization, and because of that, your risk for a penalty in an audit is relatively low. And that is true to an extent, but your safety is really contingent on the accuracy of the exemption certs you have on file. Just from talking with some of my customers, one of the first things that an auditor will ask for you is your exemption certs. So because of that, they have to be organized, they have to be up to date, and they have to be accurate, most importantly. So Marie and I are going to highlight Avalara's exemption certificate management system and our tool that'll help with assisting with just that. So mitigating audit risk is very important nowadays because, as you can see here, the states are becoming more aggressive, and you guys might have experienced that in your daily lives as well. I speak with folks like yourself every day, and they're kind of echoing a lot of these stats that we're seeing here on this slide. Anecdotally, kind of the reason that we're hearing for this more aggression is sales tax is the majority of the source of revenue for all the states. Roughly 50% of the state's total revenue comes from sales tax collection. So the states are looking for ways to increase the revenues and increase those collections. And that puts extra pressure on businesses like yourself because they're increasing their audits, they're increasing their aggression in audits. And one of the ways that they're increasing this through the laws in tax law codes is through economic nexus. So I like this quote because it really personifies what I was talking with about 2 slides ago about my highly exempt customers and their view of audit risk. Whenever I mention sales tax or sales tax compliance, a typical response from a highly exempt customer is, oh, we don't charge sales tax. That's not related to our business, or we don't have a sales tax problem. Well, nexus is changing the game, more specifically economic nexus and the compliant risk. So what do I mean by nexus? So nexus in a nutshell is just a business's responsibility to register in a state and then collect sales tax in that state and remit sales tax in that state. And some of you might have heard of Nexus, but really it had a little bit of a renaissance experience about 3 years ago in 2019. South Dakota versus Wayfair really changed the landscape of sales tax compliance across the United States. So what did this rule have? So pre South Dakota versus Wayfair, Nexus was solely based on physical location. So where you had a brick and mortar building, that was where businesses needed and required to register in that state. But as we all know, there's been a boom in e-commerce sales. And like I was saying a few slides ago, the states are going to do what they're going to do to get sales tax. So with the boom of economic nexus, they brought this court case all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that there's a lot more triggers of nexus than just brick and mortar. One of the main triggers of nexus are going to be sales into a state, number of transactions into a state. And then they can be smaller things that you don't even think about. Marketing into a state, going to a trade show in a state, having a sales team make a sales call into a state. There's so many different ways that you can trigger nexus unknowingly in this new landscape. So this is one of the ways that Avalara is going to help out is through understanding your nexus, understanding where your liability is, and then helping craft a solution that's going to take care of all of your risk and all of your liability, not just the ones that you're currently aware of. So where that Supreme Court ruling is challenging for businesses like yourself is that not all economic nexus thresholds are created equal. So as you can see here, we've highlighted all the states that have different economic nexus thresholds. And as you can see here from the side, there's a lot of differences. It's not listed, but North Carolina, once you achieve nexus, it's through $100,000 in sales, whereas in Texas, it's $500,000. So these differences in amount of sales revenue in order to trigger nexus, it's different state by state. And where it's even more challenging is these thresholds are constantly changing, especially in COVID, as states are looking to recoup some of their losses brought about by COVID. For example, Tennessee, it dropped from $500,000 pre-COVID to last year it moved down to 100,000. So essentially, if you were doing business in Tennessee, it went from having this very large threshold of $500,000 in sales. If you are below that, you don't need to register. Dropped all the way down to 100,000. So a very drastic drop. Last thing I'll mention here, y'all, is that some of you may be thinking, because of the business makeup or your average selling price, you might not be worried about some of these economic thresholds like 100,000 or 250,000 or 500,000. But just pulling the veil back a little bit more, it's not just sales volume, it's also transaction count. And this is where a majority of my customers get tripped up and they accidentally trigger Nexus is through the transaction count. As you can see here, it's highlighted as 200 plus retail sales. Think of those as transactions. So if you have more than 200 transactions or retail sales, as we highlight it in Connecticut, you've exceeded economic nexus in Connecticut. So kind of going back to my highly exempt customers out there, so you might be thinking, well, my sales are mainly exempt sales, so does this count? The answer is yes. So anything that you see here in orange, these are states that consider gross sales when they're looking at that economic revenue threshold. So that 500,000, that 100,000, that 250,000. So your exempt sales do count towards this economic nexus threshold in a majority of sales. Some of them, as you see here in purple, are mixed. And then, a few of them looks like there's about five of them don't include exempt sales. So the overwhelming majority, the lion's share of states take gross sales, both exempt and taxable, into consideration for these economic nexus thresholds. So as I'm saying all this, you might be kind of thinking hypothetically about, ooh, do I need to register in certain states, even if my sales are exempt? The answer is yes. And that's the overwhelming consensus here, is that you do need to register even as a highly exempt organization like a majority of you are. So now that we've kind of tackled Nexus, we understand what our footprint is across the United States and how that creates liability and risk. I'm going to turn it over to Maria to talk about some additional information about tax research and some other areas that Avalara will ultimately be able to help out with that we'll discuss later in the conversation. So Maria, I'll let you take it from here.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Wonderful. Thanks, Connor. It was a great review. So the iceberg slide that Connor showed is one of my favorites, because for businesses like yours, all that stuff underneath the iceberg is the compliance that you need to worry more about. And all these other things are really important to your business. And I've been in this business for a long time. Connor, you probably had the same experience. I'll be at a user group or trade show for any ERP, insert name here, and people will walk up and say, what do you do? Or they'll see a sign that says tax compliance, and they'll say, oh, we don't charge it, and they start to walk away because they're only thinking of the tip of the iceberg. So the things I'm going to go into next are things that your business does have to consider, because you do have compliance responsibilities as a business. And as Connor mentioned, yep, those are laws in those states. It's not maybe. They pass laws. And so if your business is sending goods into that state at a certain level, the state wants you to be the collector of their sales tax. You're a pass-through, or prove why you didn't, which we'll talk about those exemption certificates. But all that starts with tax research. I was just on the phone this morning with a company that we have actually worked with off and on for years, who still haven't quite figured out or confirmation or are confident that they can automate all their scenarios. So we reviewed this product with them. So this is a new offering you may not have heard of, that we have added to our sort of arsenal of tax compliance things, that is brilliant for any business that is doing a lot of drop shipping, that is doing a lot of estimating, if you have to quote big projects, do bids and RFPs, if you have complex scenarios, to understand how things are taxed when they're packaged together. Maybe it's installation plus a warranty plus repairs included in that warranty. You probably know that some states count the stuff that you use in a warranty as taxable and some don't. So if you have unusual or challenging sales tax scenarios, tax research, you're probably doing this and don't even realize you're doing it. Tax research is very, very important to your business. So we now have an application. Connor's going to talk about it a little bit later. We have not an application, pardon me, a whole library, a research database that you can have access to as a customer and partner with Avalara. So what that means is you'll have at your fingertips, instead of Googling things, you'll have the ability to actually look up the state's laws and the statutes and things that they've passed and have an understanding. That this customer I was talking with this morning does a lot of business in Florida and in Tennessee. Both of those states have thresholds, and the thresholds for what's taxable and what's not based on manufacturing. And then there's the California partial manufacturing. So they, as a business, not only need to automate, but they need to understand what the laws are in the state and be able to look up those rules and see what the state requires. So the difference is the research tool, a good research tool, having a good research tool is helpful. Some people use, if you want to go to the next slide for me, Connor. Some people use a manual lookup. They're just Googling things now. You might use a different tax research tool. You might use a CPA. So the difference between having a tax research tool and the tax calculation, our tip of the iceberg, is that the research needs to be done well before you launch your business, before you go into business. This couple that business I was speaking with this morning, they need to understand what each state requires them to do. Yes, Avatax is going to do the proper calculation. She's going to have her manufacturing certificates for those states, and we'll be able to apply them. But as a business, they need to understand how the laws apply to them. They need to understand the drop shipping laws. You can look into, so Connor was talking about the nexus thresholds. You can literally go see that state statute. You can look at my map, but you can literally drill into that state statutes and see exactly what that state counts. So towards their threshold and why. And so what it is it's a database where we've taken all the laws. So a whole bunch of people have read all the laws and statutes and translated them into plain English. So it gives us the consumer and the business a really easy way in one place to understand what the laws that states have put into place. And remember, with economic nexus, that Connor just talked about, most of you either have registered in new states or are probably planning to, or probably should, and probably need to talk to us or a self-practice CPA. But there's a lot more states that we're dealing with now than we ever had to in the past. And that's a lot of statutes for any business to understand. That's a whole lot of Googling if you don't have a resource at your fingertips. So speaking of exempt sales and managing exempt sales, this is the part that I'm most passionate about. So I'm a specialist here in our exemption certificate platform and the application of exemption certificates for businesses. So back to what Connor said, if your business does have exposure and either has had to register or is going to need to register in new states, what does that mean? That means you now have to have exemption certificates for your buyers who want to be exempt. You may have been selling to them for years, not charging them tax because you didn't have to register in that state based on the previous physical presence laws. Now that you have to register, you have to interrupt your business and go collect certificates or at least update certificates from all of your customers in those states. And that could be a business interference. So it's a challenge for the seller. How are we going to go collect it? Does our credit manager know what they're looking at? How are we going to do this? We're going to email everybody? How do we know we're collecting? How do we know it's right? Where do we put them when we do collect them, right? It poses a lot of challenges for you as a seller, but don't forget that it also poses challenges for the buyer. They're frustrated. They just want their product. They don't want to, the person buying doesn't want to drop what they're doing and go get you an exemption certificate when you've been their vendor for 20 years already. So we have to keep in mind the customer experience as well there. So, and that customer experience is key. Customers don't want to provide paperwork. They want to click to buy. You probably know this. I bet most of you are launching some kind of B2B e-commerce or improving your online experience for your B2B customer. So looking at automation, considering automation and tools that can help you make it easier for your customers to buy from you. The last thing they want is an incorrect invoice. So we want to be proactive. We want to get them set up. We want to be able to keep up with these things. So we don't want to forget that. We don't want to create so many processes that we've burdened our customer. And this is where automation can come in. And as I mentioned already, the burden of proof of filing with the states and either sending in the sales tax that you collected or proving why you didn't charge sales tax is on you, the seller, not on the buyer. I talk to a lot of businesses, Connor probably does too, and they say, well, we just accept whatever the buyer sends us because they're the ones that want to be exempt. That's maybe they are the ones that want to be exempt, but unfortunately, you, the seller, has to prove why you didn't charge tax. So you are the one on the hook with the state for making sure that your documentation is up to date, current, and correct. So even if you don't owe them any money and you just have to report in once a year, you can still be audited because you know what? Auditors know. Auditors know it's hard to manage these things without automation. They know that you're low-hanging fruit if you're a manufacturer and you hardly charge or don't charge any sales tax. They're very aware. So the fines and penalties in an audit, I mean, Connor mentioned the $114,000 average. And don't forget in that includes people. People think, oh, we went through an audit, took us 9 months, we only ended up owing the state $10,000. That's irrelevant. All the time, or not irrelevant, sorry, but that's minimal. All the time and effort that your team put into proving that you only owe $10,000. So let's just take that off of our plate and make sure that you have an easy way to respond to that auditor. Oh, so here's an example of what I was talking about earlier. So these are actually real Avalara customer examples. So you can go from very few exemption certificates in your portfolio in a single state or your tri-state area or wherever you used to have Nexus to a huge amount. So I've had just a small manufacturer in New York. They went from 75 certificates on file, pretty easy. You can stick those in a drawer, you can have them on an Excel spreadsheet. Now they have over 1,000. How are they going to manage that? And then, you know, conversely, a wholesaler or distributor, they had Nexus in one state. They ended up having Nexus in all states. They went from somewhere around 500 to somewhere around 5,000 documents. So you can dramatically increase the amount of paperwork that you have to manage just because of these laws. And it's something not everybody really thinks about. So we also need to remember that we have to make it easy for our customers to buy from us across all our new channels. Back to the COVID example, everybody's doing something different now over the past 2 years. It was taking the time to do that thing they always wanted to do. So we're adding e-commerce, changing e-commerce, maybe going B2C, maybe going B2B, but allowing people to give us their certificates to register with us faster. We might be having to either collect or verify certificates either over the counter in your warehouse or in a storefront. We need to be able to communicate more via email, not in person. Or maybe we still have people out in the field. I have one customer that wanted to collect certificates at trade shows because they want to sell things. They actually were creating orders at events that they attend, and they wanted to be able to collect those exemption certificates in the field at the trade show. So we have to think about, as our Nexus footprint expands, we've got more documents in more states, and we've got more places where we're selling. So again, don't minimize the need for automation here. And this is one of my favorite slides. Almost everybody says, oh, don't worry, we have a document management system. I've got DocTrack, or I've got whatever it's called for my ERP. We need to remember that we're getting you out of the paper and PDF business. A document management platform is just that. It's going to take a document and it's going to file that document. It's really like a virtual filing cabinet. Gets us out from having all those filing cabinets we used to have in our offices. But it's not a compliance management tool. So you need to consider in your business compliance management. And that's something that communicates with customers, that directs the customer towards the right form to fill out, that can validate the data on those forms, that has reporting, tracking, renewal capabilities, campaign capabilities, and we have to make sure it's super easy for our customers to use. Because that's not, none of those things is a document management platform. For all of you at paper and PDFs, I hear this every day. You probably do too, Connor. People say, oh, I have them all electronically. No, you just have a scanned image. You do not have electronic data or compliance management. You literally just moved from paper to a picture of that paper. That is not digital information at all. It doesn't scan or validate. It's literally just a storage cabinet. So things to think about at your team meetings. Oh, let's move on to one of my least favorite subjects because it's hard, which is use tax. So many of you probably don't charge a lot of sales tax, but you do have challenges with use tax. And use tax is challenging mostly because it's subjective. It is something, states have it. It could be different as the states require you to remit it based on how you used items after you purchase it. And it's super easy to make mistakes and it's not fun to manage, as you know. So what it is it's owed by the buyer after you've purchased something based on whether or not you paid the right amount of tax at the time of order. So you might have used an exemption certificate because you were reselling most of the things on that order, and you use some of them in your business, in the plant, or with employees. Could be that, or it might be that you bought everything here, but you used it over there. So you have to true up what tax we paid and what tax we should have paid based on where that item actually gets used. So it's subjective and requires human involvement, and it's challenging to automate, but we need to have a better way to do it. We find in practice that nearly everybody that takes the time to work on their consumer use tax practices ends up saving money because they end up paying the states less money. We tend to, you might do this, we tend to overestimate it just to try to keep the auditor at bay. Oh, let's just estimate on the high side, right? Because it seems easier than estimating on the low side, and it seems safer. And there's just lots of tricks that you can learn. So looking into improving your use tax processes and employing automation if it works for your business is always a great idea. I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry, almost sneezed. So what makes it difficult is it has to be, excuse me, a self-assessment manual process. And of course, every state has different rules. It's hard to integrate payables. We don't always have, we've got a lot of receipts. We don't always have our purchasing electronic. And again, very much like exemption certificates, audit risks are high. The auditor knows that consumer use tax is hard to manage, and it's easy pickings for them to try to poke holes in your processes. So again, it's a very risk-prone area that's challenging to manage and something that you need to know and be aware of as you manage compliance in your business. So why do we want to talk about automation? There's a lot of reasons for it. You're always going to reduce your expenses. And one thing I like to remind people, talk my hands a lot, I'm Italian, but in your business, I get a lot of people that think that tax compliance belongs to one person. Even if you have a tax director, even if you do, which most mid-sized businesses don't, but even if you do, that tax director is not the one doing all these things. So tax compliance can actually cost you money that you're not seeing because it's spread across a lot of people. So think about it this way. You've got someone managing your ERP and probably getting some tax rates in the ERP. You got that credit manager or onboarding specialist that's collecting certificates, doesn't know what they look like. They have to have expertise. They're spending time going back and forth with customers. They're spending time Googling the state's regulations. They're getting them set up as a new customer in the ERP, maybe marking the customer exempt, which often is a blanket exemption, not a state-by-state exemption. You've got your web team that's now managing all the items that you have on the web, the shopping cart there, any tax rates or exemptions that have to be applied there. You have the person in purchasing handling that use tax that has to report in every month on how these items were used. And then you've got that person that's filing the actual sales tax returns, your controller. So there's a lot of people. I could go on. There's more people. There's your salespeople out there collecting certificates in the field. So there's a lot of people in your organization that actually touch compliance. Even people purchasing things, are they purchasing with a certificate or not with a certificate? So automation is going to reduce the expenses across your organization. It's not replacing a person, and it's not something you can hire one single person to do. I get a lot of people say, well, we'll just hire someone to do this. You can't. What did I just mention? That you can't hire someone to do all of those things. One person never would, and one person doesn't know all the laws. That expertise doesn't actually exist. So that's where automation and tools come in. to make that more efficient, to actually save you money, and to manage your risk for you. Humans can make errors, humans don't know everything. And then of course, I've already mentioned customer satisfaction. Getting your compliance right improves your customer satisfaction, and integrating with your existing platforms is where you want to go. You don't want to change all your platforms just to have automation. You want to integrate. You don't want to change so many rules and processes that you already have in place. So integrating your compliance partners with your systems is super important and beneficial. Oh, one more thing. We haven't talked about these yet, Connor. So business license are part of compliance as well. There's something that states or states, local municipalities might require you to have as part of your business. So managing those well is good compliance as well. So when we think about our compliance documents, we also want to think about the types of business licenses that we have. So you probably have a business license just to operate your business at your location. Your physical location. You might have a contractor's license. You might need permits when you go out and do jobs. A lot of businesses I work with have to have permits when they go out to do construction work or installations or design work. And then of course, there's just your sales tax registrations. Those are technically considered a business license. So where do you put that registration? Did you all know that some of those expire? So some states, I think it's 3 or 4 states now, actually have expirations to their sales tax registrations. So you have to keep current on those and make sure you stay registered as a current business with that state. If you're not registered, and this happens to Avalara customers a lot, if they haven't re-registered, they can't file their sales tax returns. They end up having to go register and do a back filing. So you need to stay up on those nowadays, and you're going to have a lot more registrations than you ever had in the past. And things like getting your own exemption certificate. So if you're a distributor and you're purchasing, you want to have your own exemption certificate from all those states you just registered in, so you don't have to pay tax when you buy stuff because you're going to resell it. And then you may have professionals or fleets of trucks and all kinds of things. So all of these things count towards compliance. And there could be, like my other example, distributed across your organization. Somebody may manage the professionals licenses, the guys out in the field might manage the permits, and then people at corporate are going to manage your physical business license. So we need to collaborate and think about automation for that side of your business as well. So it's challenging because just obtaining them is challenging because we don't know where to go. Business licenses might come from the state, they might come from the county, they might come from a parish, they might come from the city. So you all know when you go to do a job, when you go out and do a job, someone's got to look up to see what the licenses and permits are. How do we know what we need there? We might need this type of permit for this project, but we might need a different type of permit for a different project. How do we know where to go? How do we know what authority to go to? How do we know if you have everything you need? Have you covered all those jurisdictions? And then how do we keep track of it? Some of these things have to be renewed quarterly. Who's keeping track of all that? It's really a bigger thing. It's kind of like those exemption certificates. We thought it was minor when we had one location. But now that you look at the expansion of our footprint of our business and where we do business, it's a challenge that we have to think about maintaining compliance and having the knowledge and expertise at our fingertips to do so.
All right. So thank you so much, Maria.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who's feeling good, right? We talked about all the challenges and the obstacles that customers of Avalara have experienced. But if you're feeling bogged down, if you're feeling overwhelmed, do not worry. We are now about to talk about the things and the products that Avalara will do to alleviate some of these obstacles and challenges that you all are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Because at the end of the day, our goal here is to make life simpler for you so we can take compliance off your plate and you can focus on other business priorities. So let's talk about it. So before I talk about Avalara software with any of my customers, first thing I always do is ensure that they know in which states they have accrued liability. So this is vital because really what we want to make sure is we're ensuring that we're correcting all of the risks, not just the more apparent ones in the states that they know they need to register in. So if there's ever a question about, do I need to register in this state? Or I've kind of done some business in this state, or might have hired an employee in this state. Do I need to register in it? I always recommend doing an Avalara risk assessment, because Avalara's risk assessment is going to identify in which states a business has accrued liability, and then how much, like monetarily, how much liability has been accrued and has occurred. So this is important because we want to, again, understand the landscape, understand the scope of the project before we even talk software. So that's really where we start the conversation, and where I'd welcome starting the conversation with any of y'all after this presentation. So what I'm going to do is, Maria brought up about 4 or so different challenges. I'm now going to correlate that challenge with an Avalara tool. So an Avalara tool that we know that we can use to implement into your environment to alleviate that challenge. So when Maria was talking about product taxability, well, this is our product taxability tool called Avalara Tax Research, ATR for short. And in a nutshell, think of ATR as the Google and Wikipedia for product taxability. So what I mean by that is, once we know exactly in which states you need to register or which states you have liability, then we need to determine how and then why your service offerings are taxed state by state. Because as Maria mentioned, product taxability differs state by state. So we can't make an assumption that just because your goods are taxable in Florida, they're going to be taxable in the other 35, 25, 5 states that you do business in. There is that difference state by state. So this is where Avalara Tax Research comes into play and really serves as a value add. So like I mentioned, Google, Wikipedia put together, but really what it does, it's going to give you access to our up-to-date sales and use tax database. Think of it like a library. And in that library, we're going to have all your products and services listed. And what we do is, rather than having you read a very long tax law filled with legal jargon that a majority of us probably won't understand, I'm speaking mainly for myself as well, we're going to give you yes, no answers. So let's say that you sell software. You sell software and you want to know how software is taxed in 25 states. Well, all you have to do is put in software, click the 25 states that you want to have that determination on, and then Avalara Tax Research is going to give you easy yes, no answers, taxable or exempt. We link everything to the tax law that our tax researchers who made that determination. We link that on the back end. And really where Avalara Tax Research pays for its weight in gold is in our Q&A feature. So let's say that you had a question, you put in software, you looked at 25 states, but you had a question about South Carolina and why the ruling was what it was, or why the determination was what it was. Well, you can click contact the expert, ask whatever specific type of situation question you have for that situation, and then that goes to our tax researchers, who are going to respond within 48 hours with a response that will be backed by audit. And that's really unheard of in this industry, to have real life interaction with someone to give you a specific answer that's going to be backed by audit and is protected by audit. It's unheard of. Sometimes CPA firms can answer those questions, but it takes a lot longer. They might charge by hour. That's not the case for Avalara Tax Research. You can ask as many questions as you want. They can be as complicated and complex as you want. And that's just part of your service. You don't get charged by the hour, charged by the question. So it's a really robust tool to mimic what Maria said, to really answer the how and why your products and services, how they're taxed. It has other features like nexus, like we can run nexus reports. We can go through on the use tax side of things. If you have a global presence, it also has a very robust functionality for different global type of transactions, your VAT, GST, HST, and it's just, again, a really powerful research tool that's going to give you a lot more information about how and why your products and services are taxed, not only across the United States, but across the world. So I like this slide, and I'm actually going to just click through it all so we can look at it all together at once. So again, like I talked about, everything is kind of like a chain, right? Or a domino. The first thing needs to happen for the second thing to occur. So if we start off here, it's not listed on here, but first thing that we do is, again, identify what states that you need to register, and that's through our risk assessment. Once we've identified our risk assessment, then we have our tax research to understand how your products and services are taxed across the United States or across the world. But then from here, we have our compliance suite of products. These are really our bread and butter, but not just the only type of products that Avalara has, as you'll see here shortly. So I just kind of want to run through how Avalara works holistically. So whenever an invoice is committed, right here in this middle system that says your system, whatever your specific system might be, whether it's your ERP, whether it's your e-commerce platform, point of sale, whatever you are using to make those invoices flow, that's going to flow up from your system to Avalara's tax engine called AvaTax. And now AvaTax is reading all 13,000 tax jurisdictions across the United States. And once we determine where exactly that invoice is going to, predominantly based off the ship to, we make that tax determination, align it to your invoice, and then flow it right back down into your system with the correct tax aligned. So really where this is efficient for you and going to create a lot of a value add for you is, rather than having you go through and Google and trying to figure out what the different tax rates are for some rural town in North Carolina, I can say that because I'm in North Carolina, just have Avalara system do that for you. If there's any changes, let's say a tax rate change, let's say a jurisdiction change, let's say a taxability change, any of those changes, we update those in real time. So you don't have to do any of that manual oversight for tax determinations, tax calculations yourself. But I know a lot of you on the presentation today are dealing with non-taxable customers as a highly exempt organization. So how does Avalara make that differentiation? Because it's very important to make sure we're not accidentally taxing your non-taxable customers. So we follow that same exact process again. Invoice commits in your system. It calls up to our tax engine, AvaTax. Well, AvaTax on the back end is going to make a simultaneous and instantaneous call to our exemption certificate management system called Cert Capture, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. So Cert Capture on the back end is going to house all of your exempt customers, their exemption certificates. And when AvaTax makes that call to Cert Capture, it's essentially asking the question, y'all, is this customer taxable or non-taxable? How Cert Capture makes that determination is it rolls through all of your exempt certs. Think of it like a old school Rolodex, and it's going to essentially try and find the exemption cert for that specific customer. So let's say customer XYZ makes a purchase, the invoice flows up to AvaTax, AvaTax calls to Cert Capture, and if Cert Capture finds customer XYZ's exemption cert, they deem that as a non-taxable customer. The sales tax transaction stops there. But if they roll through all of your exemption certs, can't find one for customer XYZ, they're going to make the determination that this is a taxable customer and continue to align sales tax to that invoice. So again, it goes back to that differentiation of making sure we're taxing your taxable customers, but not taxing your non-taxable customers. And then so for your taxable customers, once AvaTax and Avalara has successfully aligned sales tax to that invoice, you then need to remit it, right? And so this is, again, where Avalara has another functionality and another value add to all y'all out there, is that AvaTax is not only making sales tax calculations, sales determinations, think of it also as like a repository of all your sales data. So what I mean by that, let's say that you're filing monthly in California. So for the month of April, we're going to store all the sales tax calculations that occurred in the month of April. And when it comes time to file in early May, what we do is AvaTax pushes all that sales tax information from our tax engine over to Avalara Returns, in which we then file and remit on your behalf. So there's no need for any manual oversight. There's no need to download anything to then upload it to a Department of Revenue website. Truly, y'all, it's just one system talking to the other. So again, really looking at this picture high level, the goal of Avalara and our products is to take the manual oversight that you've been doing yourself and automate it and streamline it through our compliance suite of products. So Maria talked about integrations. So continuing that conversation, at Avalara, we have over 1,000 built integrations and named partners that we have for the integration side of things. So whatever type of system you're using as your ERP, more likely than not, Avalara uses it and it has a working integration with it. And so peeling it back a little bit more about our exemption certificate management system. Now, Maria did a really good job of kind of alluding to it when she was talking about how to tackle exempt customers. So telling you more about Cert Capture. So Cert Capture is going to manage the full life cycle of your exemption certificates. Really, as Maria alluded to, static document management systems, they're not viable, right? Especially with the different requirements of state. It's not doing you justice. It's not getting you compliant. Cert Capture is what's going to allow for that compliance. Because really what we do, in a nutshell, just giving you some high level things that Cert Capture does, we're going to ensure that that exemption cert is correct. So we're going to ensure that it's a valid certificate when it's brought into Cert Capture. We make it easy for you to retrieve new exemption certs, either through a single request or an automated campaign if you've got a lot of exempt customers whose certs are expiring and you want to recollect them. Speaking of expiring certs, we also have a reporting and tracking method where we're going to let you know, and you'll be able to have easy visibility into when these exemption certs are going to expire. Because the challenging part for businesses like yourself is exemption certs don't expire all at the same time, unfortunately. It's just like economic nexus. It differs state by state. Some states like Florida, exemption certs expire every year. Then there's other states like Illinois that expire every 3 years. And then there's some states like New York that are good indefinitely. North Carolina is the same too. So rather than having you keep that all in your head and keep a mental note of that, Avalara's Cert Capture is going to do that for you. So in a nutshell, it's this automation is going to replace some of those more tedious tasks and the manual processes that you've had to do of capturing and storing exemption certs. So this is a really good slide, and it definitely piggybacks well off of what Maria was saying was, in this environment that we're working in, especially in as things have shifted with COVID, a lot of you all are interacting with your customers through multiple different platforms and multiple different streams of revenue. So you need to consider all these different levels in this omni-channel seller type of market about how things work. And I think we've covered a lot of this of, understanding where do you need to be registered, understanding how your services and products are taxed, understanding for your non-taxable customers, how do I manage them? What do I do in order to stay compliant when my customers aren't being charged sales tax? And then the biggest one for all of you, whatever the specific makeup of your business is, I know that all of us on the call today care about customer experience, right? That's a big driver of why customers are partnering with Avalara, because we make the customer experience from collecting exemption certs, from charging the right sales tax, from taxing the right services. These are all tools that Avalara has, but it all bubbles up to the reason of we want you to have a great customer experience for your customers. So some of these, we've kind of been talking high level about this, but we wanted to give you a few different screenshots of what your customers are going to be seeing when they're providing exemption certs. So, they're able to view their existing certs and the status of those exemption certs. And this also can be applied to later purchases as well. So you don't necessarily need to collect a new exemption cert every time a customer purchases something from you. Going through this as well, so we can do that collection at time of checkout. So rolling through this, kind of already talked about this. I do want to save time at the end for questions. So this is really just talking about AvaTax, which I had mentioned in our compliance suite slide. But again, some things that AvaTax does, we are going to do address validation down to the household. So we're making sure we're getting that exact right tax jurisdiction. We apply any sourcing rules, whether it's like California, where it's mixed, or sometimes it's based off origin. A lot of times it's based off the destination of your good. We're getting all the different levels of the jurisdictions. So the state tax, the county's tax, the city tax, and any of those special local taxes that are hard to find. We take all that together and give you one clean rate in real time. So taking a lot of work off your plate, we're trying to get you off Google as much as possible with Avalara's products. And then use tax as well. This, as Maria was alluding to, Avalara Consumers Use is our use tax tool that's really going to help with that consumer's use and the assessment of consumers' use. So really the value add of Avalara Consumers Use is we're reducing your expenses because we're identifying any overcharges for vendor sales. You're getting a lot more control over the self-assessment for that use tax. And really kind of the nice part about this too, Avalara Consumers Use, it integrates transactions from a lot of different systems into a centralized self-assessment management tool. So as we were talking about with that omni-channel slide, we know that use tax, no different than sales tax, is coming in on a lot of different verticals and a lot of different platforms. Avalara Consumers Use Tax is able to integrate with those. And then returns, Avalara Returns. So like I mentioned in the compliance slide, not overcomplicating Avalara Returns. What we're going to do in a nutshell here is we're going to handle the filing and the prep for you. And then when it comes time to file, we're taking all that sales tax data that we stored from our tax engine, pushing it over to Avalara Returns to then where we will file and remit on your behalf through an ACH pull. So really no exposure there because it's, again, a system, our system, Avatax, pulling from that system over to Avalara Returns. So no manual oversight, no need for you to do any recalculations. Really, I mean, I just recommend folks just eyeball it a couple times in the beginning when you're first starting with Avalara. And then, once you feel comfortable, you can really just let this thing do its thing. And then, so the last slide is about license management. So Maria did a good job talking about the complexities of license management and how it just differs state by state, and not only differs state by state, but just different licenses are unique based off of what vertical they fall into. So Avalara License Management, or ALM, is our version of a platform for all of your different licenses. And it has a lot of similar functionalities to Cert Capture for your exempt certs, but just think of this just for your licenses specifically. So we make it easy for you to request new ones, to manage them, know if they're gonna expire. And really what this does, coming down here, it helps with a lot of tasks that a lot of you guys might be doing by hand. So if you're setting up calendar invites for exemption certs, or for this specific case for licenses expiring, no need to do that. That's going to be all handled throughout Avalara License Management. And again, a big thing that it's going to do, it's going to free you up to talk about or to do other tasks. Alrighty, so I'm just going to go ahead and come to this slide here so Maria can wrap it up and we can have some time for questions.
Perfect. Great job, Connor. So this is what I always love to leave folks with. This is my I call it my trip to the doctor. So if there's anything you take away from today, take away this list of questions and really consider whether your business is compliant and how you might get there and how you might implement automation to support improved compliance. There's a lot of things under that iceberg. So think about how many states you have nexus in or should have nexus in, what percentage of your business is exempt, etc. So this is kind of Maria's takeaway. And if you haven't done a nexus analysis on your business to know where it has a nexus presence today, promise me you'll do that with us or with a self-practice CPA soon, because that's really the starting point for everything. So thanks for your time. Courtney, do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Maria and Connor. So we're going to open it up for questions now. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter them in the questions section of your GoToWebinar or in the chat. And we've had a couple questions throughout the presentation, so we'll start with those. Our first question is, Should I just have a database for certificates I can reference, or should I link them to each transaction?
Maria, I will let you take it as our Cert Capture expert.
Certificate person.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did kind of mention a little bit about that. So exemption certificates we need to have on file for each customer, for each state they want to be exempt in. And so what happens is in our traditional way, we tend to mark a customer exempt like once and for all in our ERP. So we definitely need to make sure that we have individual documents on file from that customer at the state level, because as Connor mentioned, we have to apply the expirations and rules for each state. So for that customer for each state, and let the system do its work for you and make sure that you and they are compliant in all the states.
Thank you, Maria. And then our next question is, what if each location is under different business or franchise? Should I get a different exempt form?
Yes, so that's a great question. I deal with a lot of businesses that have several divisions, and sometimes they have crossover customers depending what they're doing. So yes, by law, again, these are state laws, each entity each customer that buys from each one of your entities does need to submit a separate exemption certificate specifically for that entity. So you might have a customer that has a 2 or 3 multiple certificate. So yeah, that's what the law says. And you'll see on some of the forms, if you're familiar with them, it actually even has the vendor's name on them. They can be very unique. So the auditor is going to want to see a unique one for that buyer and that seller, because those entities can also be audited separately, right? They're separate entities. So they can be, one can be audited, the other one couldn't. So you have to have the right documentation according to that state's laws for that entity.
Okay, and unless we have any other questions submitted, this is going to be our last question, and it's also about certs. So if I just need help managing exemption certifications, is that something Avalara can help with?
Oh yes, absolutely. So Connor ran through kind of a list of different services and products that we offer. Absolutely. If you're a 100% exempt organization and you just want to manage, do a better job or a fantastic job of collecting, managing, renewing those certificates, absolutely our platform can be used as a freestanding compliance management, replacing your document management platform. You bet.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that's all for our questions. And I'd like to thank Marie and Connor for giving us a great presentation today and just really making all of the technical, complicated information seem quite simple. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. And also I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for attending this webinar. And we all hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, everybody.